This podcast is brought to you by Qube Gallery, the premier art space in Cebu City, focused on showcasing contemporary art. Established in 2013, Qube Gallery has been working hand in hand with artists to bring artistic visions and diverse forms of creativity to life. A few days ago, they launched a new exhibit called Camping Trip. Camping Trip is headlined by Irene Barrera, Terence Duarte, and Jepoy Santos. I got a chance to interview the three of the artists from Manila, and it was really fun to talk to them and connect and learn from them. So that episode is going to be out maybe next week or next week, so stay tuned. But while waiting, feel free to drop by Qube Gallery. If you're listening to this in May, it's still very likely that their camping trip is there. So head on over there to Qube Gallery, or you can reach them by sending an email to info@qubegallery.ph or send them a message through their social media channels. Let's get to the show. Welcome to Zerothreetwo Conversations, the podcast where we talk to creatives, see how they live, and how they do their work. I'm your host, Carlo Villarica. Hello there. You know, I'm sitting here. It's late at night, and I have my ankle, my left ankle is wrapped with bandages right now to just compress it. I sprained my ankle. It's so funny. Whenever I see my relatives, they look at me, "You sprained it again?" And then it reminded me that last year, probably less than a year ago, I sprained my ankle also. So I hope it's not going to be a recurring thing. I sprained it playing basketball, and then the sucky thing about it is 2017, 2018, I played a ton of basketball. In 2019, I probably played like less than 10 times. But a few days ago, I went down to the basketball court because Manu, my kid, he wanted to play, and he wanted to play in a real basketball court. I was like, all right, I'll bring you down there. So we went down, and there happened to be a group playing. So in between the games, you know, as I shot a few hoops with Manu, but really, since there was a game going, we weren't able to do much. But I got to small talking some of the guys, and somehow I was able to join some of the games, and then turned out to be a pretty intense game. So one of my rules actually was like, if I'm going to play basketball, if I haven't played in a while, it's good to get in a game where it's not too serious, and then you're just running and just jumping, just getting your body used to the motions again. Because the thing is, if you jump to a serious game all of a sudden, I feel like your body hasn't adjusted to, you know, just jumping up with intent, you know, trying to get a rebound, trying to get a layup. So what happened was, I haven't played in a while. I was trying to get a rebound, and then when I landed on the side of my foot, and then I sprained it. So yeah, it sucks. I hope. And then I was like, oh man, like this doesn't happen when I'm cycling. I was thinking, I don't get these kinds of injuries when I'm cycling, and then now I'm getting it when I'm playing basketball. It wasn't. Past few days has not been that much fun. I watched Avengers, and then, you know, I brought a cane with me, and I was walking really slowly up the bathroom every time I needed to pee while the movie was going on. So that was a pain in the butt. But yeah. So again, thanks to everyone who submitted questions. Not as many questions for this Ask Me Anything as previous episodes, but still a few good ones. So speaking of Avengers, first question was actually from Steph, my wife. So she asked me, if you were an Avenger, who would you be and why? I'm just gonna. This is really like a filler question, but again, I'll put it out there. I want to be Spider-Man. I'd be Spider-Man, just because he was one of my favorite comic characters when I was a kid. It was him and Wolverine. I think I had a Spider-Man poster up in my room. I'm sure I had a Wolverine poster in my room. I had one Wolverine poster, and I think across him was a Spider-Man poster. I'm not super certain. But if you notice, like the things that the characters they have in common is they're flawed characters. They're always like battling with some inner demon of theirs. So that just makes for a more interesting character. Flawed characters. They're the best. I mean, like Superman. Superman's pretty boring in a way. I mean, don't get me wrong. I also liked Superman growing up. I remember I had the comic of when Superman died when he fought Doomsday. But but he was, I mean, I don't know. I feel like Wolverine or Spider-Man, they were much more relatable as characters just because of their flawed characteristics. All right, so first real question. So this is from @Bry_. Oh, this is Brian Onlatco, actually. I interviewed him in a previous 032 Conversations episode. And then he asked me, what's your editing process for the podcasts after you record? What gear do you use for your recordings? So let's get the gear question out of the way first. That's the easy one. So when I first started recording, I didn't want to spend a whole lot on gear. So I actually just borrowed a USB microphone for the first maybe 10 episodes or something. And then eventually I decided that I was going to continue doing this podcast. So I upgraded my equipment. And the first thing I bought was this Zoom H5. It's a handy recorder. And this is really good. Like, I find this recorder super, super good. It's kind of annoying that you have to put in, I believe it's AA or AAA batteries. But it does the job. You can put in 2 microphone inputs. It has its own microphone if you need it. And it's super clean, super easy to use. Best purchase for the podcast by far. And everything else I actually had before. So currently I'm talking on... So back when I was still playing music, we recorded most of the Rescue a Hero album on my laptop, actually. So I had a couple of microphones lying around, and one of my favorite microphones is the one I'm currently using. It's called the Shure SM58. It's kind of a legendary microphone. Rock artists used to love using this microphone because number one, it sounded pretty good, and then number two, it's robust. This thing you can drop it and nothing will happen to it. I think I've owned this microphone for more than 10 years now. So it's still pretty good. And then the other microphone that I use, I'm going to get it from the bag. This is the crappy microphone. So when I do interviews, the interviewee gets the Shure SM58, the good microphone, and I end up using this M Audio. I don't know. It doesn't say anything. It just says M Audio Sound Check. So I don't know. I can't exactly tell you what kind of microphone this is. I don't even know where I got this, to be honest. But, it works. The sound from the Shure SM58 is so much better than the M Audio, but it's good enough. It's good enough, especially if you just need to ask questions. So that's it. I mean, aside from the 2 cables for the microphones, it's really the 2 microphones and then the Zoom H5 handy recorder. And then that's it. And I'm ready to go with my interviews. Oh, wait. Well, there's one last thing that I have. So earlier on, I would do the interviews and guests would hold the microphone. And some guests have a tendency to not talk to the microphone. Like they'll talk and then the microphone is facing the totally opposite direction, which makes editing the video, editing the podcast kind of a pain in the ass. So I bought a mic stand. I don't even know what this brand of the mic stand is. I think I saw this in Lazada and then it looked pretty sturdy. And I read some reviews and I just needed a sturdy microphone. This is, I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to read this. I think it's called Amun. It's basically a small microphone stand, like a table stand. So you could put it on your table and then it just holds the microphone. So this one helped a lot so that now guests don't need to hold the microphone as I do the interview, which makes the sound much more consistent over a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour period. So that helps. But let's get to the other part of the question, is what's your editing process for the podcast after you record? Actually, after the recording, I do very little editing. Most of the work is done before and during the interview. Let me explain. So before the interview, I don't go in blind. Like I'll research as broadly as I can about the guest. I'll Google them. I'll look at their social media. Then as I'm reading about them, sometimes they have a quote that comes out that's interesting. Or when I'm looking at their work, sometimes I have a question about their work. Then I'll write that down on my notes app on my computer. And then I just basically put all the notes in a notepad. And then after I read enough about my guest, then I look at the notes and then I'll move them around. I'll be like, oh, this will be a good place to start. This will be the middle. This will be the end. And then, but the notes aren't a requirement. Like, the interview does not need to go exactly how my notes are. Sometimes, if the conversation is just flowing, I'll just throw all my notes away and then just keep the conversation going. And then when there's like a little lull in the conversation, then I'll do a quick glance on my computer. And then there'll be a question there that I'm already prepared with, and then I can go to that question really quickly. So there's a lot of preparation before the interview just to make the interview free flowing and good. Because during the interview, it's my job to make the guests feel at ease. It's like one of the things that frustrates me when watching when sometimes I'll hear a local interview or watching somebody on TV doing an interview, and then somebody I respect, I want to learn more. A lot of it is very mechanical, and you can tell that the interviewee is not at ease. He's just not relaxed. Sometimes they have like 5 minutes. You know, they talk for like, they have a 5-minute, 10-minute interview. And if you're not used to that, if you're not used to being questioned or as an interviewee, then it's hard to get them to just sit back and relax. So a lot of my initial work in the beginning of the interview is just to make the guests feel at ease. And then one secret to do that is to start with a low stakes question. So in fact, part of my sound check when I talk to guests is I ask them what they had for breakfast, just to get them talking. And then sometimes it goes nowhere. A lot of people just go, I had the breakfast meal in McDo. and then I just go, oh, what time did you wake up? And then they say like 8. And then that's it. It ends there. Then I just ask them. Then the second thing I ask them is, can you state your name and what you do? But I try to start with something low stakes and easy. Sometimes it goes somewhere. One example of it going somewhere was the Christian Linaban episode. In the beginning, we started talking. In the beginning of the interview, we talked about his diet, which was really interesting to me. I believe he's a vegan or vegetarian. And then also doing intermittent fasting, I think. I forget. You'll have to re-listen to that episode. But the other way for me to do it, the other way to have like a low stakes, easy question to make the guests feel at ease is I just ask them about their background, like how they got into the art that they're doing or into that creative work that they are doing. And usually it gets a guest to open up. So I'm not just booking an interview, sitting down and just talking. There is a lot of preparation involved. In fact, a lot of preparation involved, and then a lot of, I don't want to say art, but there really is a way of doing an interview well. And I've done some bad interviews and I've done some good interviews. So a big part of it is, like I said, making the guests feel at ease. In fact, some people have suggested like trying to shoot video while recording the podcasts. And then I've thought about it. Like I really thought about it. And then one of the biggest disadvantages for shooting a video for me is that once the guest has video, somebody shooting video in the background, they know that there's a camera there. You get what I'm saying? They can get tense just because the camera is there. That's counterintuitive of what I want the guests to be. I want them to feel comfortable, at ease. So if somebody's shooting video in the background, if they're not used to it, I don't know. I don't think it'll work as well. Right? So that's, to me, the key to a good interview for me is to connect with the interviewee. I want them to feel good that we are talking. I want them to feel like they sat down in a coffee shop or they went to a bar and had a beer with a friend and then they just kept talking. That's what I want them to feel. I'm not trying to get guests to say something they will regret in the future. Like I legitimately am curious and want to learn from guests. So yeah, just some thought on how I prepare. It's really, so going back to the question, what's my editing process after I record? After the interview, there's very little editing. I might cut the first few minutes of an interview and I might cut the last few minutes. Usually I don't. And then that's it. And then that's the meat of the interview. And then I'll record an intro. I'll do a sponsorship read. I'll do an update on what's up with me. Some maybe other random stuff that might be floating along, something worth talking about. And then I'll record an outro. And then I'll just stitch all that together. And then that's really it. That's the editing process. That's the biggest bulk of it. Let's get to the next question. This is from Vaughn. Hey, gamit kayo mong podcast for me, kay naman pod ko negosyo, and it's really good to have a news update on the local scene. Ganahan pod ko mo support in any way possible. Akong question is, how can I support local while benefiting from it? I'll read that again. How can I support local while benefiting from it? This was a really interesting question. My first instinct was to dismiss this question as kind of strange because, why support local with the thought of benefiting from it at the same time? Like, how do you support local while benefiting from it? It's like I'm only going to support this thing as long as I can benefit. It sounds like that. I know he's not. I don't think he's coming at it from that perspective, but it does sound like that. To start, first off, don't support local. Support something you think is genuinely good. Like if you listen to good, if you like good music, and then give give the local musicians, local artists a listen. And if you enjoy what they are making, the music they're creating, then, give them a listen, support them, go to their gigs, stream them on Spotify, whatever. But don't support just because it's local. Support something that you like, that you genuinely like. I think Bobby Olvido said that as well. He said, just listen to the music you like, and then if there's a local act that local act whose music you like, then yeah, listen to them and support them. Don't support local just because they're local. So let's get to the meat of the question. How can I support local while benefiting from it? So why support something while thinking of ways to benefit it as well? So this got me thinking. Like I said, I wanted to dismiss this question at first, but it got me thinking because it's kind of what I do in a way. Because this podcast was born from finding a way to contribute to the creative community. And then I thought something that would match my skill, my interest, and the kind of person that I am. I thought the podcast would be a really good way to do that. It allows me to meet creative people, share their stories in a way that is really consistent to the person. Like, I'm not editing what they say. I'm not trying to get them to say anything with an agenda. It is whatever they say, that's what goes into the podcast. And then you have a lot of... you don't get a soundbite from them. You get context. You get what they said with if they say something with conviction, you also hear everything they said before that and after that. You get a lot of context when you listen to the people I interview. So, but anyway, that's the whole podcast format, and then that's one way for me to contribute to support the local community. But at the same time, this podcast does benefit from, I do benefit from this podcast. Like, this podcast literally just makes some money. But it's not making me or anyone rich, really. If you work in a McDonald's, that's probably about how much the podcast makes. Probably a bit less. So, it's not, it's not a huge source of income, but I feel like the benefit is from getting to meet all the people that I got to meet through the podcast, or getting to reconnect with them, because I feel like this podcast has the ability to, in a way, raise the creative community. I mean, it's not the main reason, but it is one of the things that I feel like can teach people who want to be a creative in the future. Because I think of the audience of the whenever they do an interview, I think of the listener as someone who wants to do something creative but doesn't know where to start. So if they wanted to make a clothing brand, then they'd listen to Franz Deadways or Adele from Strap. Or if they wanted to be a musician, there's so many choices in this podcast. Recently interviewed Jude Gitamundok or Russell Manaloto. Or you can listen to Carlisle or Katsky or Carlo Sente. Those musicians all come to mind. If you want to be a filmmaker, listen to Christian Linaban or the Victor Villanueva episode or the Ara Chowdhury episode. Or if you want to get into cycling, you can go to the Raikido or Ayan Intong episodes. And there's even more cycling episodes on the way. I recently talked to Christian Lim and Shirel Gomez, so they're going to be coming up in the next few weeks. Or like if you just wanted to get into that whole advertising world, I talked to Brian Onlatco, Carla Adlawan, Jude Crisostomo. Or if you just want to be an artist, I talked to the Bart Brothers or Winda Remonde. I even talked to those artists who are showing in Qube. Thank you, Qube, for sponsoring the podcast, speaking of. But I talked to Reen Barrera, Terrence Duarte and Jepoy Santos, or more popularly known as Mr. S or Mr. Sasquatch, I believe. Catch their exhibit in Qube Gallery. So there's so many people to learn from. But when I created the podcast, the idea was not to benefit from it. Now, there's nothing wrong with benefiting from creating something, or from benefiting from something that gives back to the community also. Because like I said, so this podcast, so I'm behind the scenes, I'm also trying to find more ways to make this podcast more profitable. You know, as I mentioned, we have advertisers. We have a Patreon. If you head over to patreon.com/032, you can see all these details there. You can, support the podcast directly. We have like a monthly subscription type thing. Or we also sell our merchandise, of course. But it's all really difficult. Doing this, not only are there not that many podcasts in Cebu, but this hasn't really been done before locally. Trying to get income, revenue from a podcast. So there's no real blueprint, right? But with all that said, the main purpose of the podcast isn't to benefit from supporting our talents. The main purpose is to create conversations, discussions that can benefit the creative community. So I want people to learn from listening to this podcast. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with trying to benefit monetarily from the work you want to do. In fact, I found that making money, having capitalist intentions is totally fine, as long as you're being fair and kind. Like if you're a music label, give royalties to your artists. Support your artists. Things like that. Of course. And then as you can see, like even locally, these music labels who are doing that to their artists, Kadasig or Tutu Tango come to mind. They're flourishing. They're getting a lot of gigs, a lot of airplay, a lot of attention. And then they're only able to do that because they do make money. They are businesses in their own right. But at the same time, they are fair to the people they work with. They are kind to their artists. They treat them well. And then they also treat their listeners well. They give them what they want. Good music. So, in order for these organizations or entities to stay alive and better yet thrive, it needs to be worthwhile for them to do so. And then that's also what I'm trying to build here with Zerothreetwo Conversations, or Zerothreetwo as a whole, really. So, yeah, if you want to support Zerothreetwo, you can find ways to do so. Yeah, so how do you support local while benefiting from it? I don't know. I'm only telling you how I do it. So I make a podcast. I try to get people to pay for it. But it's not benefiting from the podcast. It's not the main reason to make the podcast. So I think if you're trying to support the local industry, you should do that wholeheartedly. Maybe ask yourself, is that something you would do for free? And then I realized that this podcast definitely would be something that I would do for free. Like I did it for free basically for a year before making anything out of it. So, it doesn't really answer the question, but maybe get some insight on how I approach it. Last question. Somebody asked me recently on Instagram, are you on Spotify? He's like, you should be on Spotify. I like your podcast. I was like, yeah, we are on Spotify. We're everywhere you can find podcasts. I think a lot of people are still listening to the podcast on their desktop. Like they go to zerothreetwo.com, they click on the podcast link, and then they listen on the podcast on the player. If you're doing that right now and you have a smartphone, you can head over to Spotify. You can subscribe to Zerothreetwo Conversations. We have a new episode every Tuesday. Or you can download a podcast app. If you're using an iPhone, you'll already have a podcast app. I think it's called Podcasts. I'm not sure. But there's already it's one already there. If you have an Android phone, you can download Google Podcasts. I think that's what it's called. But there's a million apps out there. Download one. You can subscribe to 032 Conversations. Yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed that episode. I wonder if you want me to do more Ask Me Anything episodes in the future. Please let me know. It's kind of fun. It's also kind of difficult. I don't know, talking by myself for like 30 minutes is difficult. I don't know. We'll see. The music from this podcast is Piano March by SHOWNOTES. If you haven't figured out yet how to support the show, there are 4 ways to do so. Because, with your support, it allows the podcast to thrive. It allows me to keep it going. Honestly, producing the podcast does take up a lot of my time. I have to book guests. I have to interview guests. And again, I told you it's something that I would do for free anyway. But, if there's a way for me to make podcasting more worthwhile, that would be really, really helpful to me. And so, first, maybe check out our Patreon page. Again, it's patreon.com/032. And we have a couple of goals there. I think the first goal for me is just to reach like $100 a month or something. And I think if we reach $100 a month, then it'll allow us to pay a local musician or artist for their music. So check it out. So first goal, $100 a month. If we get $100, I'm going to look for a local musician or artist. I'm going to pay them money, like real money, and ask for their music to be played on the podcast instead of the generic YouTube music that I got for free, which is Piano March by SHOWNOTES, which I really like, by the way. But I think we can do better. It'd be cool to get some of the local artists or musicians and get their music into the podcast. So right now we're at $22 a month. If we can get 100, that would be awesome. The other way to support 032 Conversations is to buy 032 merchandise. You can head over to assembly.032.com and just order stuff from the website. The third way is to share this episode on social media, and the fourth way is to leave a rating on iTunes. Again, I hope you enjoyed that episode. I'll see you next Tuesday for another 032 Conversations. This is going to be a real interview next Tuesday, so stay tuned. Ciao.